On to the markets now, and there are several things we've got to discuss with today's analyst. Agriculture is just one of many things being impacted by the government shutdown. Livestock is included in that list. As part of the country digs out from the snow, there looks to be more on the way. We'll look at how the markets are responding. And after a strong 2018, have we hit the high point for beef demand? Dr. Derrell Peel is here to help us make sense of it all. He's a livestock marketing specialist with Oklahoma State University Extension. Thanks for joining us, Derrell.
You bet.
So, to begin, as the government shutdown drags on, of course, no new USDA reports, so fresh data is harder to come by. What other issues has this been causing for the livestock markets?
Well, generally the lack of data or the hopefully delays in getting this data is impacting agricultural markets. We didn't get the January WASDE report, the annual crop production numbers, the winter wheat seedings, which is important from a cattle perspective as well in terms of wheat pasture grazing. So we're already missing those. More directly, the cattle market is going to be delayed in terms of the January cattle on feed report. And probably the most important of all is the January annual cattle report, which we've been waiting on to really see what happened in 2018, and it tells us something about what we can expect in 2019. So presumably we'll get that report, but it's going to be delayed.
So when any of those new reports do come out, what are some things you're going to be looking for, or any numbers that you're particularly eager to see?
Well, again, we always wait for that annual cattle report because we only really get it once a year. Sometimes we get a mid-year update, but the January one is the most complete inventory report we get all year. So we're always anxious to see that breakdown, what actually happened last year in terms of change in the herd size, change in overall cattle numbers. But we're also looking at things like the number of replacement heifers on January 1, which gives us an idea of what to expect in the coming year. So those are anxiously anticipated big reports, and again, we're not sure now when we will get those.
That's right. Any advice for producers on what they can do in the meantime?
Well, the one thing I would say in this shutdown relative to the last one, and that is that we've continued to get price data. AMS has continued to report prices, so we are still getting that, and that's very important in terms of the day-to-day action in markets. What we're missing, of course, is really the production stuff, the stuff that NASS does. And so those are generally a little longer term impacts. And I say all that to answer your question by saying, I really don't recommend producers sort of change any of the plans that they had at this point. I wouldn't make it, any new moves at this point. There is a little more uncertainty, and the longer we go on, that uncertainty gets bigger. But again, we got price data, so we kind of have a monitor on what ongoing markets are doing at this point.
And switching gears to the weather, some parts of the country got hit pretty hard with snow last weekend, and as we're recording this, we've got more in the forecast. So what impact is the weather having on the cattle market?
Well, we're likely to see some impacts over time. The snow hit a part of cattle feeding country. A lot of the area that didn't maybe get snow got rain, and it has very wet, sloppy conditions. So that impacts feedlots. It's going to delay marketings. It does tend to hold down carcass weights, but again, that's one of the pieces of data we're not getting right now in terms of weekly slaughter and carcass weight information. So it generally is supportive from a short-run supply standpoint. Feedlots were relatively current going into this, and winter weather impacts tends to exaggerate that a little bit. The other side, of course, is that we can see some demand impacts at times. If we have winter weather in population centers, certainly the East Coast is being hit as well. If there's less travel, less eating out, those kinds of things can show up as a negative impact on the beef demand side.
We've had a lot written about beef demand over the last year, and I read an article where you're quoted as saying 2019 will be more of the same, but a little less. Do you think this is the year when beef production is going to peak?
I think it might well be the case that 2019 approaches a peak. Again, we don't have the cattle inventory, but we think we probably grew the herd a little bit more in 2018, so that means we'll continue to see slightly bigger cattle numbers in 2019. Beef production is projected to be up again in 2019, and that may be very close to a peak. It might go stay flat or go slightly higher in 2020, but we're very close to the peak here in 2019. So beef demand has been very critical in 2017 and 2018 to absorb the pressure that increasing supplies would put on the market, and that will continue to be the case in 2019.
So what's your opinion as to why demand has been so strong?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Of course, when we say demand that way, we're really lumping domestic demand and international demand together. If we focus on the domestic demand for a minute, you know, up to this point, we've had a very strong macroeconomy. We've got unemployment very low. So that's a part of it, certainly. You know, there have been ample supplies of other meats, and sometimes you know, we're just have to accept the fact that beef is very popular right now, and consumers have continued to purchase beef even though they've had plenty of you know, competing proteins to choose from. The other part of it that has really helped the cattle markets the last couple of years has been on the international side in terms of increased exports and, you know, steady imports. The net effect of that has been very positive for cattle markets.
And that leads into my next question. With international markets, anything in particular that you're paying special attention to here?
Well, obviously on the international side, we still have a lot of turmoil right now in terms of the trade wars, trying to resolve some tariff situations. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there are impacts, and to some extent those impacts will continue to accumulate as we go forward. You know, it takes time for the impact of trades to work their way through the markets. It can affect the U.S. economy. That's one of the things that's a bit of a threat to the U.S. macroeconomy, is the fact that eventually more and more of those costs of tariffs we have on Chinese goods and other countries will be borne in the U.S. by consumers, and that may impact demand. The other side of it, of course, is just the trade flows are being restricted in many cases. We're delaying our access to some markets and facing larger hurdles with the trade stuff as a result of this.
Dr. Derrell Peel, thanks for being here today. Always good to speak with you.
You bet, anytime.